Good morning, everyone, and welcome. A couple of notes before we get started. This is number two of a two-part series with Suzanne and Andrea from Housing Innovations. We are so excited to have you back. I hope that many of you were able to join the first session and through that maybe understand why I love so much Suzanne and Andrea and their training and the information they provide is so useful and real about the types of clients that you all are working with and serving and trying to help stabilize in housing. So this is session number two. Quick note, if you have a Read AI thing of some kind, or an OtterBox AI note taker or anything like that, if you need it for accessibility purposes, please private message myself, Sophie, Suzanne, Andrea. We will make sure to allow that to have access if you need it for accessibility reasons. Otherwise, we are going to be kicking those things out. So if you don't let us know, you will lose it. I thought our first session went really, really well. I would love for folks to let us see their faces a little bit more this time. The smiles, the giggles, the squinted eyes, if you're confused, really help the trainers and help us understand how the training is going. So if you're able to be on camera, we would love to see you as much as possible today. And with that, I'll just thank Sophie and Aaron for getting this whole thing set up and doing all the logistics to get you all here and get our trainers here. And I'll hand it over to Andrea and Suzanne.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We love seeing your faces too. We know sometimes you don't feel super camera ready, but you look good to us. And like Rachel said, it's great to see people smiling or inquisitive or whatever, to see those looks. So we welcome you to turn your cameras on as much as possible. And like last time, we have a few breakout sessions. We definitely hope when you're meeting your new friends and colleagues from around the state, that you can turn your cameras on if they're working. And I know sometimes that's a problem. It's an issue with your computer, but we'd love to see your faces. So you met us last week. I think almost everybody, it looked like a lot of familiar names. I'm Suzanne Wagner. Andrea White is my partner in crime. And we have been working with Rachel and her team, Sophie and Erin, for a long time and working in Delaware for a long time. And we're really pleased to be back for part two of Housing Focused Case Management. Um, like last time, we know you're busy. You have a lot to do. You have people who need you. Taking time away for training is hard. It's hard to do, but it's important for us to get a break, to think about things. But from our perspective, we see it's really important to make this session meaningful and valuable for you, so that you have tools or ideas that you can run with right after the session's over at 12 o'clock today. And we really count on you to keep it real with us. And I like that Rachel said we try to be real, because that is really important. We don't want to be pie in the sky, but having interaction helps us really keep this content on track for you and respond to the stuff that's coming up for you in your daily work. So if you haven't changed your name, we do use the Zoom log for attendance for the meeting. So if you haven't changed your name, and I can't see everyone right now because there's 52 people, but if it's like iPhone 7, if you could change your name to what your name really is so that it'll show up on the attendance. And if you need help with that, I would just say maybe you could message Sophie on that. So we do love interaction, as I said, and we have a few breakouts. We got a couple polls, but don't wait for us to ask what you think. If you have something to say, raise your hand, unmute and chat, get our attention, or you know. And then just because it is Tuesday already, right? Monday just flew by, and we know that you had a busy morning. By now, you've already dealt with whatever kids, dogs, cats. Clear the deck a little bit and start with a fresh thinking. Is just to introduce yourselves to everybody in the chat box. We don't have time to go around. Put your name your agency, your location. This is a statewide training, so with people from all over. And what is the image that's on your screensaver? Usually that's something that makes us smile or feel nice. You can see we have a picture of a cute little doggie on the top here because that's my screensaver is a picture of my little doggie who's makes me smile every time I look at him. Um, so if you wouldn't mind sharing that in the chat, maybe it'll give you a smile too, thinking about what your screensaver is. Could be your phone, could be your tablet, could be your computer. We're not picky. I have different ones. One device has a sunset. So, my beautiful daughter, thank you. Myself and my beautiful daughter, thank you, thank you. Your animals. Okay, great. Flowers, pictures, great. Natural scenes. Okay, Hatteras Lighthouse. Beach screen. See, don't you feel better? It makes me just feel like all those good juices that flow in your body thinking about nice images. Okay. Nature, ocean. Oh, love it. My girlfriend. Oh, that's nice. My goddaughter. Koi Pond. Okay. I think we've got you there. Hopefully everybody's taking a breath and having a little smile and thinking about those nice images. And thank you for coming back. We got some positive feedback from the session, and we're looking forward to another great session. Stars. Okay, great. Oh, I love reading this. Well, when we have breakouts, I'm going to read them all in details. Eventually on Zoom, all be able to show our screens or something like that, but we're not there. So since we know not only has a lot happened for you today, this morning already by 10 o'clock, but since last week when we got together, we just like to recap a little bit of what we covered in session one just for a minute. So we kind of started off by talking about how does this housing focused case management fit in with housing first and housing stabilization, which is really the goal of housing first. And we had a poll about housing first where people could talk about how they're feeling about it. We acknowledge that it's difficult, but we also talked about what is the process that can help us make this work for people, right? And we went over how is housing focused case management structured and talked about engaging the relationship that still in all at the end of the day this is a relationship based business, and we need to connect with participants and get together in a working relationship and create a plan to go forward. In order to do that, we need to engage them, find something we have in common, find a way to connect and start to learn about the person, what's happened to them. We talked about assessment and really assessing, especially housing histories and homeless histories, because that's really important information for helping people stabilize, right? Unfortunately, the best predictor of the future that we got is the past. It doesn't mean it has to repeat itself, but it does give us information. And we really want to take our work and housing focused case management is really to prevent eviction. It's to help people maintain their housing and avoid the same thing happening again. So if we know what happened in the past, then we're better able to plan for the future. And then we started to talk about how this whole process of engagement and assessment, which is going on simultaneously, really, we're meeting people, we're learning about them, we're connecting with them, offering them resources, we're learning more about them, and then we're also learning what their goals are, what's important to them, what's meaningful in their life, what's their housing goal long term, not just short term, which is the next place they live. We talked a lot about that, but what is their long-term plan? But we also talked about setting goals with clients. Many of the people you're working with, some of you are working with people who have been homeless for a long time or have been in various systems of care, foster care, prison, mental health care, and they've had lots of service plans. We call it a housing stabilization plan. How do we have a meaningful goal, not a goal that people just give us so we can write the plan and put it in the file? It's really important that the housing stability plan is a living document that you pull out regularly, that you use with people, and that is really meaningful for them. So I think Andrea gave the example of, is housing stability a really sexy goal? Most people aren't going to say, what do you want in your life, Andrea? Housing stability. No, that's probably not what they want. Maybe they want a single family home. Maybe they want to live near the beach. Maybe they want to reconnect with their family and move in all together. But we want to set goals with meanings. And we introduced something at the very end of the session called the So That principle, which is really trying to understand when person says, I want this or that. What is the meaning behind that goal? I use the eat healthy one because it's really easy to understand. I want to eat healthy. Well, why? I want to eat healthy so I look good. I want to eat healthy so I live long. Those are two different motivations. So we really want to understand what the motivation is. And we're going to have a chance to talk about the So That principle because we're going to talk about service planning today. So we'll get a chance to go through that. Um, you'll get a chance to do that exercise. So a couple quick polls just to get your fingers working. All right. See how they're going today is some reflections on session one. So which of these housing focused case management activities are you doing or planning to do in your program? So these are things we talked about last time in the session. And it's a long list. It should be multiple choice if I set the poll up right. So you can pick as many as you are already doing. And then there's a second question after you answer question one is whether you feel you have more tools or ideas to support you in your work and or your program. And that's a yes, no, not sure. I'm not going to read all the answers to question number one because that's a lot of reading. We'll read it when we get the results. Okay, so hopefully everybody's got a poll that popped up. Everybody's technology is working today. I'll give you another maybe 10 seconds. I know it's a lot to read, so 10, 15 seconds. All right, we have about 75% of people participated. We have a bunch of hosts on this call, so that's a good 37. That's a good uh amount of responses. Okay, so I think you should be able to see the results. Well, wow, everybody's doing at least something. So all the different activities we asked about assertive engagement, assessing housing and homeless histories, mutuality and goal setting, understanding long-term goals, that's really high, teaching tenancy skills. Great. Coordinating with landlords and property managers, building participants' motivation and confidence. Those are two of the highest. Oh, connecting with community resources, actually the highest. Helping with income, 50%. Connecting success to people's goals and dreams. That's great. It's great that you're doing it or thinking about it. Hopefully, you're thinking about assertive engagement, or maybe you're doing it, or maybe you don't need to because you're engaged with everybody, but definitely want to just give a shout out to really working hard to engage with people. And then whether you feel you have any tools or resources, about 71% of you do, about 3 of you, 13% don't, and some of you are not sure, 4 of you. So we have some more resources and tools today. And hopefully there'll be something that will be you'll be able to use when you go forward in your work. So what are we going to do today is we're going to pick up on developing the housing plan and talking about how we set goals with participants and develop a housing stabilization plan and then work that plan with them. We're going to talk about resources and a tool we have for individual resource guides. We're going to talk about landlords and how we can coordinate with landlords, which is great. Looks like a lot of you, 2/3 or more, already doing that. And then we're going to wrap it up with eviction prevention strategies. And we have some references. And in case what happens oftentimes at the end is that we get a little bit rushed because we're committed to ending on time. So I don't always go through all the slides at the end, but one thing you'll see in the slide deck, which thank you, is already in the training folder and is in the chat. If you want to open the slide deck, is a whole bunch of pet resources. Pets came up a couple of times last time, then so we thought we would share some pet resources that we have for you. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Andrea now.
Thanks, Suzanne. So let's talk a little bit about housing and service planning. And Suzanne went through what we went through in the first session, and those are the building blocks for this service plan. And it should guide the work that we do with each person we work with or each family we work with. And there's a service planning template that we're going to talk about more. And you can just click on that. You guys should all have the links. They were attached to the invite. So they're right in the PowerPoint. And the most important thing about the plan is it's a working document, right? Is that the plan is only as good as how much you use it. So you should revisit the plan, and every time you meet with somebody, talk about it, maybe reframe it. The housing plan really provides that structure for people to move forward and reach their goals and address the barriers in the future. So it teaches people the skills, gives people confidence as they move forward, and it also allows us to, as I said, reframe it. We want to increase people's opportunities to do things more independently. And the housing plan for rapid rehousing is also guided by the temporary nature of the program. So the timeframes are set by the structure of the program, and we want to talk about where people are going to be when that program ends. So that's a big part of that goal plan. Okay. Did you want
Do
to say
you
something, Gina? No? Okay.
do you
All right.
want me to show the service plan document?
Yeah, please.
It should be up.
Yeah, it's okay. So
This
the
was the
service
one that
plan,
was in the slides.
yeah. So the service plan is it is divided into several categories, right? Housing, health, parenting, um, non-acuity activities. Yeah, I think this is the Connecticut.
Yep, it is.
Okay. Um, so one of the things that we're going to do is come up with a goal, and we want to really pay attention to the long-term goals, right? Those are the so that goals. Like Suzanne said, I want a house by the beach, I want something like that. And then we're going to go through objectives. And it goes through, there's a limit to the amount of goals as you see it. And the person responsible, we're going to put that down. And don't hesitate to put down workers' roles. We're going to divide them into chunks with a time frame so that people can see those. And we're also going to look at, how long we're going to be looking at goals. And finally, this is per goal. And finally, one of the things that we're going to do is have the tenant sign it, the case manager sign it. And even more, the most important is for the tenant to sign it, but also important is that you want to indicate supervisory review. So we probably should put in also resources, and we had actually added that to an earlier reiteration, but we want to think about that too. Does this
And
make
in each of these boxes is where you would describe the different interventions. So it might
That's
be
right.
connecting with, getting a birth certificate as part of the objectives, the interventions that need to take place to achieve the goals.
Yeah, so we want to talk about what the worker's going to do and what the person's going to do and the person responsible. And then we want to talk about how long we imagine this will take to get a birth certificate, right? So we can reframe it. There may be obstacles in it, and we can always reframe the duration, but we want to think about some sort of time frame because that gives people more structure. Okay. Let's go back. Yeah, there we go. So this is just a reminder, you guys are all taking not all, but some people are really taking a look at that significant engagement, that persistent engagement, that's key to developing a plan. You want to do a good assessment, and we covered that in the first session. You want to do that goal development and those motivational techniques, which are those felt goals with meaning to people. Those are the things that provide that motivation for them to work towards the things that they have to do to maintain housing. Like Suzanne said, housing stabilization is not exactly sexy, and paying rent is the opposite of sexy. But you know what? If their goal is to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, And that's something there we can talk about how paying rent will keep them in housing, and housing is a critical part of getting a girlfriend or a boyfriend. So um, that's some of the things we want to think about, those motivational techniques. And then finally, we want to really work that plan, which means that we refer to it because remember, the plan provides people structure, a path forward, um, and also provides a way of identifying where people are making progress, which is critical for the motivation for them to move forward. Okay, let's go to the next
Before
one.
we go to the next slide, so the couple of people are asking for that document. You'll definitely get,
Okay.
you can have that service plan document, but just know in the document, there are a number of underlined links. So hopefully we've checked them all and they're all working, and you should be able to, if you have the PowerPoint, also just click right on this and click into the document. But we'll make sure everybody can get everything that's in here. So thank you.
Great. So the other part is, we want to limit the areas of intervention. We also want to use the assessment and the acuity scale to help people move forward. So there's a acuity scale at the back of the assessment, and those are one of the things that we want to look at. And remember, that identifies both strengths and also challenges. We want to focus on the pressing needs that impact housing retention. What's getting in the way of them keeping housing? We've already established why they want to keep housing. Now we want to go for the whole how. We want to relate everything to those long-term goals, to those things, those felt goals that have real value to people. And we want to be aware that sometimes people need to take a step back in order to take steps forward. So this is not always a straight line. I don't know about your lives, but rarely do I reach a goal with a straight line. So that's one of the things that we want to think about, and that people learn things from that. And we want to just pay attention to that and really reframe it. We also want to connect people to sustainable resources. That's going to be critically important in keeping them stable long term. Nobody's saying that people won't need some sort of services long term, but they should be in control of their services. We're going to talk about later on a resource guide for people. They should have things that will support them in the future. Because of the short-term nature of rapid rehousing, that is critically important for PSH, but it's particularly important for rapid rehousing because they're going to need to get this network of care that leads them forward. And a network of care, it includes both supports and also services. So we want to think about that. We want to think about what services we provided, how people can continue to get those services or master the skills that they have to take over those skills. Okay. So we're going to try a group discussion. This is around the so that principle, right? So I thought we did this last time. Did we do this last time?
We didn't, we introduced it at the end, but
Right.
we didn't have
Okay.
time
Right.
to.
That's right. Okay. So that, so that, one of the things that we're going to do is, Suzanne's going to divide you up into groups, and this will be there. And either somebody in the group can think of their own personal goal. So not overly personal. Remember, this is these are your colleagues, right? If you're thinking about getting a divorce, probably now's not the time to think about it, right? But some sort of goal that you had, some sort of life goal that you have. It could be going back to school. It could be eating healthy. It could be a bunch of different things. Um, and then another person is the worker, and they ask you questions about that goal. So, what do you imagine will happen if you achieve that goal? What is the reason for achieving that goal? So you want to achieve that goal so that what happens? And so that's how we get those felt goals. So that we want to do that. The other person in the group, I'm not sure how we're going to divide this up. If there are only two people, just two people do it. If there are more than two people, the other people can be the observer and give feedback to the other two and report back on the conversation. Okay. So we're going
Yeah,
to
I'm breaking the groups up. Everyone will be three, except for one room has two people in it.
do.
That's how that's how it worked out. And I did not assign our co-host, so if Sophie or Rachel wanted to pop into room 17, you could then make it a third person. Okay.
Let me just remind people, we asked people to turn on your cameras and how much we appreciate that a lot of people did, but that in this group, particularly in small groups, it's a little disorienting for people in the groups if they can't see the other people or hear them. So please turn on your camera, especially in the small groups. Does that make sense?
And it's also a great chance to meet other colleagues.
Everybody, thank you. So just general impressions at first. You don't have to go through every thing, but how did it feel to ask people these questions, both for the observers, the worker, and the person? Did it feel familiar? Is it something you do sometimes? Do you do it every time?
Well,
Is it interesting to learn the motivations behind the goals?
Yeah.
Well, it's very interesting to me. It's very easy for me because I talk to people all the time, something I do every day. So it seems very familiar, I would say.
Good. Did you see it as being helpful?
I see it as being helpful to a person, but I ask questions that people should think about when it comes to how to achieve the goals that they want to have.
Mm-hmm.
So not just the yes or no question, but the questions that require a response so you can say out loud and hear yourself out loud talk about how you achieve the goals you achieve.
Yeah.
So
you're
I
working
think
on that motivation.
Shay took herself off mute.
Great.
Didn't
Shay?
you? Shay? Did I make that up?
You made that up.
I did. I'm sorry.
We also have Melissa said in the chat, we're all on the same page about what we would ask. That's great. So this is something that's pretty familiar to you.
Karen, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something? Or did you
Not
just
necessarily. I just forgot to mute back.
Okay.
Okay.
We just love to hear people talk, and I guess I'm always surprised by what the reasons are behind people's goals, right?
Absolutely.
Like they're not always the same, and people have different motivations. A lot of people, motivated because they want a better life for their kids, or they don't want to look poor anymore, or they want to, they want to put their homelessness behind them and be a volunteer or something. That a lot of different motivations for people. Treaty, your hand is up.
Yeah, there we go.
I thought that it was, definitely good just to get the feedback. And sometimes, you know your goals, but then the reason behind them is just like, okay, puts it into perspective a little bit more about
Yeah.
how
I'm in a
obtainable the
meeting,
goal
but
is. So I think it was good to get feedback is like, why we want it so that we can, do this. And it just helps put it into perspective, make it more realistic. So I think it was helpful to have the feedback from the person that was in my group.
That's great. If people have taken motivational interviewing, one of the things we talk about in motivational interviewing is building a discrepancy between people's goals and people's behavior, but it's hard to develop discrepancy and if there's not any, right? So sometimes we're expecting discrepancy between program goals and their behavior, but once we get those real goals and see what's behind them, as Trudy said, it's a lot easier to identify that motivation, and it's a lot easier to have the second part of that conversation. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Andrea, can I ask a quick question before we move
course,
on?
Rachel.
You were using the language felt goals.
Yes.
When you say felt, you mean not like the soft fabric, but you mean
No.
yes, but you mean like that's part of the so what thing is okay. The goal is to not lose my housing and become homeless again. Someone might say that like to not become homeless again.
Yeah.
That could be their goal, but what getting to the so that is getting something that they feel so that they feel connected to the,
Yes.
it's the
Yes.
the goal that is felt by the participant.
Yep, it's the goal that's in their heart. It's the goal that really has value to them. It's the aspirational goal. It's the goal that would motivate people to get through this stuff that we ask people to do, right? Which is not always that much fun, right? I mean, getting a birth certificate doesn't charge me up. I don't know about you guys, right? But if they know that one of their goals is to get a car and the first step is to get money and having a birth certificate is important to that goal, then they're more motivated to do that. Yeah. And so it's something they can feel in their heart. It's something that they really do feel, and it's something that helps them move. One of my coaches used to say, ask why until somebody got emotional. That's how we would know. Yeah, yeah. It's something that really means something to them.
Dr. Terry has her hand up.
Yep.
I also think Trudy Fisher had her hand up at some point.
We Trudy talked before.
Perfect.
Dr. Terry?
Do you want to say something?
Good morning. I apologize. Yes, one of the things earlier we were just talking about goals, but one of the things that we use are goals and objectives, and
Mhm.
sometimes we don't know how to distinguish between the two, how to achieve the goal by utilizing certain objectives. And so those are some of the things to help my clients understand the difference and how to map out those resources to connect to getting to the ultimate goal that they want to achieve.
Yep. The objectives are critically important. It's a way that people can can figure out if they're going in the right direction, and can identify some confidence in moving forward. But it's also a way that we can identify, what's not working for them, so we can reframe it. It's a really good point. The objectives are critically important.
I think we're ready to go, yeah.
Yep, here we go. So, as Dr. Terry just mentioned, we also want to focus on resources and resources to connect to, which is an important part of the planning. So, in order for people to fully integrate into the community, each person needs a range of services and supports, right? So we want to help each person or family to connect and begin to manage each support as a full partner. So part of that, we're mentoring in the mutuality that we're doing with a goal plan and with the work we do with people. And we're encouraging them to be a full partner and express what they want from their resources. So those are a key to housing stability, not only now, but in the future. And just a thing for permanent supportive housing, we talked about how it's really important with the rapid rehousing, but permanent supportive housing becomes a small town very quickly. Have you seen that? And we want to focus people out, and we want people to have more choices as far as resources is concerned. And it's only possible to connect people within the community. Okay, so let's go to the next one. So we want to develop a tenant resource list, and we're going to go through that in a minute. And that we want to build on that, and we want to start that as early as possible, hopefully in shelters. But as soon as you meet with people, you want to get their resources down and you want to build on that. Nobody's going to have all the resources. It's also a way to have a conversation about different resources, and they're organized the same way that the assessment is organized. So you want to identify what are the needed connections, what are the connections that they've got, and you want to ask people to think critically and how useful those resources are. We're also going to include natural support. So probably the easiest way to do this is Suzanne's going to pull up the resource list, and we're just going to go through it quickly. We're not going to read you the whole thing, but we're just going to hit the big topics. You're muted.
It's also linked in the
Yeah.
slides, so you can hopefully get the document.
Yeah.
That's right there.
And there it is. So it's divided up into categories. The first one is
This is based for an individual tenant. So this isn't like a program resource list. This is a
No.
person's resource list, right?
It's a person-centered resource list, and it's set up so people can actually use it. So you see the basic demographic, and so we're going to deal with a little bit emergency resources. So these are things that people need in a resource, and you see they're both supports and services. It also tells people their telephone number, where to locate them, their address. And at the bottom of that, it asks for what documents you need to bring if there's an emergency, and that's been really helpful. And it also asks where they keep those resources, so that that's an important thing to do. It also includes other things like, do they have a file on who's going to care for their pet when they're gone, or who's going to care for their children when they're gone? So it's not only resources that are concrete, but it's also what are those resources that they've got in their file. We recommend you give it to people with an accordion file so they can keep both their documents and this resource list in it. It doesn't work for everybody, and you'll see it's repetitive because some documents are the same for other things. But as you see, it goes through emergencies, it goes through housing, it cues people to keep things like their lease, any receipts, any inspection schedule. So it makes it easier for people to manage their tenancy. Utility bills are on there, and we go through this. Financial, the same thing. It includes both employment and benefits, how they can contact people, also some in-kind resources like food banks and clothing banks. And then it goes through what are the documents they want to hold on to and what will be necessary when they meet with these resources. So you go through here. So Sophia just put the tenant resource list in the chat. So if you want to get it that way, that's great. As we said, there's medical, same sort of thing. There's also mental health, which is the next one, same sort of thing. And it's both formal and informal resources like coaching, clubhouses, hotlines. I want to really pay attention to this, which is warm lines, which people rarely use. Is that something that people use here? Anybody? No? Warm lines are usually staffed by peers, and they're usually run by your local mental health, but they are non-crisis lines. So if somebody needs a little support, they can call that line and they can talk to somebody, and that's been hugely helpful to people. Priorities are people that are calling you at all times of the day and night. They probably just need somebody to talk to, and we eventually want to develop those resources, but a warm line is a great resource that people can use. As I said, there's a list of, medications, that sort of stuff. Substance use resources. I just want to say something about substance use resources. Oftentimes people would say, as we went through this list with them and asked them about it, well, I don't have a substance use problem. Well, that may be true or not true, but substances affects everybody's life. So just knowing the resources is helpful, and we can talk people through that. So it gives you an intro to, bring up these sorts of issues. Okay, let's go to yeah, there we go. Yep, so these are education and employment, both for families who have kids, and also for their own income, income and employment, and that's their own, education and employment. And once again, these are the resources. We made sure to make sure the VA resources were in there. And these are just a partial list of community connections that people might consider, things like libraries, clubs, vet centers, food pantries, dog parks, friends for every family members. It's important that people are aware of these resources, talk about these resources, and also know how to connect them. This was designed around people who have trouble with organization, task prioritization, that sort of thing, so that it gives
Oh,
people,
wow, where are you from?
okay, so that it gives people an organizational structure to really think about their resources, and it's been really helpful to people. So that this may take multiple conversations. This is not going to be done all in one shot. I don't care if you're an A student, you're not going to get every thing filled in the form. And that the other thing is it can show areas of strong support, and it can open up the conversation of people to think critically about their resources, what's working, what needs to be reframed, what needs to be renegotiated. And it's been very useful to people Just like any other form, it doesn't work with 100%, but it's been very helpful to people and really helps people catalog those resources.
And that's a Word document. I know Sophie
Yeah.
popped it in the chat, so you can modify it. Anything that we're sharing with you, you can use or modify however it's maybe helpful to you. And I know with a lot of people, they don't like paper anymore. I'm one of those people, but it could be an online Google document, right? It
Yep.
doesn't have to be printed out. Other people, they want it printed. So, let's do that folder thing that Andrea mentioned and give them an accordion file to stick that in and all those other pieces of paper that, are always flying around.
Yep. The other important thing about resources is we need to know something about them, right? We're gonna take a look at directories, people using opportunities like training to talk to people about you're looking for a resource, what's around, talking at your COC, talking to your 211 folks. You want to develop, and most importantly, talking to the people you serve. You want to really get that resource list. You want to meet with the resource. You want to talk about what you're trying to do. You want to explain your role. You want to gather and share history, of course, with consent. And you want to attempt some coordinated planning. The other thing is we recommend that you offer to accompany people, especially in the first time they see the resource. You want to see how they're going. You want to see how they negotiated. You want to see how they negotiate with the resource. You want to do some modeling, some mentoring around that. And you want to have a plan about how people can best connect. People oftentimes need some help connecting, and need some help managing the process of connecting to the resource. You also want to maintain regular contact to see how things are going. One of the big advantages is there are no surprises. You say to somebody, "How's it going with your psychiatrist?" And they say, "Good, good." And then you talk to the psychiatrist and you find out they haven't been there in 6 months. So you want to know that. You want to take that as an opportunity to see if that service is working for them, if they need something else, what their priorities are. You want to try to revisit that. And finally, you want to know what's important to these resources so you're good at negotiating. For instance, medical resources really are focused on follow-up and people coming to the appointments and those sorts of things. You want to share that with people so that they know what their priorities are. So you want to make this a more of a mutual thing. And you want to make sure that if you say that you're going to do something, you really keep your promises. So Dr. Terry has a comment?
Yes. One thing I realized is even when we are communicating with our clients to reassure them that if they are not a good fit, and sometimes we have to say, some doctors or some therapists may not be a good fit, and
Yes.
if that's the case, it's all right if you need to change, because I
Yep.
want to have a good fit. And sometimes it may take twice or even three times
Sure.
for you to fit, to fit like a glove. But
Mm-hmm.
do not get discouraged because everyone's personalities does not click. And it's all right to tell me that, that you want someone else. It's all right to change genders if you thought you wanted a male and now you want a female, or
Yep.
you have a female and you want a male. It's all right to say that. And sometimes I have one who have two clinicians. So, and it's all right if your insurance is going to pay for two for different reasons and you connect in different ways, that's all right to give people more options as well.
It's such an empowering message, right? Is that you deserve a good fit. You deserve somebody who really meets your needs. So that's a very powerful message and it's really important. And it often is not the first time, right? The other thing is about this is if you're having trouble with a resource, let's say it's a mental health clinic or some sort of clinic, and there's sort of a pattern of problems that you're hearing about in your team meetings, you want to also do the same thing, is talk to your senior staff, talk to the COC, talk to a bunch of people about how you can improve that connection and how people can really hear what it is you're needing from them. So an example is the VA. Everybody had to have an appointment, but for their outreach program, they had a really hard time locating the right person for the appointment. So the clinic set up a walk-in time for them, and then they could bring in anybody who was interested, and then they could get into the system. And that was really helpful to them, but that was negotiated through senior staff and supervisors because they'd identified the pattern that this makes it more difficult to access services. So that's really important. Thanks. Okay. So think about, we're going to divide people into groups. Think about what are resources have been most important to you and most useful, and where is there a disconnect. So definitely talk about the successes and the biggest challenges you're facing in connecting people with resources, or identifying resources, or having the resources be a good fit for the people you serve. So let's divide up in a group.
I'm just going to recreate the group. So we're going to mix this up a little bit. See
Okay.
how we have a lot of
The other
people.
thing that's been very useful about this exercise is people hear about resources when people talk about the successes that they hadn't been aware of or hadn't been thinking about, and that people do a lot of sharing of resources, and that's been really helpful.
Yeah, and I think in every training we've been in, and I believe last week someone shared some, maybe it was furniture resources, I can't remember,
Mhm.
but I know every time I'm in a session, I learn about new resources. So definitely, as you meet your colleagues and chat with them, maybe you're going to find, hopefully you'll find out about some new resources that'll be helpful to you.
So we're going to pause the recording. Here, I can do that. That was helpful.
Yes, it was very helpful. I'm going to put in the chat the Housing Alliance number so that people can reach out to Housing Alliance when they want referrals to their clients to get housed. That's a good resource to get people started if they want housing.
Great.
So what resources did people find most helpful?
Yeah.
So in my group, I found that Connexia Care, they have the permanent support housing referral, but you have to go through like a process through central intake. So I think I would like to take advantage of that opportunity for the clients we're gonna serve in our transitional house once the clients start to come and participate. And then the other young lady helped me understand what the rapid rehousing process was about, because I didn't really understand what that was. I kept hearing a lot of people say it, but I didn't understand like the procedure that you had to go through to, participate with that during my organization. So both ladies was very helpful, and that was useful information that can help us go forth with helping supporting people that are, going through homelessness and wanting to recover and regain housing stability.
So great. So the housing resources, and most importantly, explaining to how those programs work, because that's really important.
Yes.
I see some stuff in the chat that DOL is a great, Department of Labor is a great resource. That legal aid has a centralized intake. Legal aid is a really important resources. Food pantries. I see the link for housing, Housing Alliance. And that those were some of the resource. Whoops, there was one more. Libraries. That's a huge resource, right? DOL stands for Department of Labor, and they have some employment possibilities.
So it is rare for Department of Labor to come up as a helpful resource. So I just want
That's
to
right.
give
Yeah.
a round of applause for that. I'm so excited because employment is such a barrier for people, and especially in rapid rehousing, we need people to have money so they can pay their rent. And it's just great to hear that DOL is a good resource. And
Absolutely.
need more resources downstate.
Did you
for-
see any
for-
patterns with challenges?
one thing that came up in the chat is downstate has less resources
Yeah.
than northern parts of the state. That's common. Ministry of Caring is furniture. Furniture is another really important resource in helping people get stable and feel comfortable in their homes. And it's often a barrier in a lot of communities. We've seen people move in, people with no beds, no furniture whatsoever, and it's really not a great way to start off. You know, I mean, sometimes you don't have resources, but it's great that you have some furniture resources.
It's hard for people to be stable when they don't consider it a home. I also want to point to Ministry of Caring, the furniture resource that Phyllis put in the contact. And that they also offer food, clothing, showers, laundry. So these are great resources. Go ahead. Who was going to say something? Was it Aaron?
Hi, this is Martha. I'm from Milford Advocacy. I
Hi.
know we don't have as many resources in lower state, but we do have a couple programs that might help you, which are our Welcome Home program, which is specifically we get in-kind donations for gently used furniture and anything for in a home. So if someone has a new place, meaning a room, an apartment, a house, a camper, doesn't matter. If they reach out to us, we will try to help get them the items they need.
Wow.
And so that's one. And then we also have an ID assist program, which helps with birth certificates, IDs, and things like that. So it's a little bit more centralized. You would have to get to either Georgetown or to the Dover office. ID, excuse me, the can't think right at the moment, the DMV, sorry. And we would help pay for those. There's qualifications for each of those, but basically it comes down to if you are someone who's experiencing homelessness or you're in a poverty level, meaning you have a fixed income and it's very low. Those are some of our requirements, and we will get one copy of them for each person as long as we have funding.
That's great. So access to ID resources was something that came up in the chat. So that's a great resource for people.
Martha, could you put your agency's name or a link to the website
Yeah.
or something in the chat box? I see the chat is just popping with resources.
Yeah.
So this is our favorite part of the training.
Absolutely.
When people come together and share what they have, even in a place like Delaware where, you know, you feel like you know a lot about what's there, you've been working for a while. People are always discovering new resources in the sessions, and I think it's really a great one of the benefits. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, everybody who's sharing all those great
Thank
resources.
you.
I think really getting people comfortable in their homes goes a long way to housing stability and housing retention. Anybody else want to share anything before we move on?
Friendship House also mentioned that they have resources for birth certificates, state IDs, and bus passes. So that would be another great connection.
Great. Okay. So now
I'll just, oh,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead, please.
I was
No,
just gonna
please,
add real
Rachel.
quick. It didn't come up, but one of the things that I just wanted to add was like connecting people to faith communities can be really
Yes.
supportive for them in a lot of different ways. And I just wanted to mention that because it can be an important resource for folks.
That is really important for community, but also faith communities oftentimes have resources and are willing to help.
And it is, I'm glad you did a commercial for it, because also in your state, there is a large
Yeah.
faith community that has missions to help people who are in need. And it is on the tenant resource guide list of the faith community. And one thing we learned in our practice is that we weren't, you know, we're in New York City when we were doing the work. I don't think I mentioned that, but you know, we were very secular almost to a fault, and we didn't really bring it up with people. And very often when they got stable in a new place because they had moved or they were in a new neighborhood, they needed to find a new community and in a new spiritual community. And then, as Rachel mentioned, usually there's so many resources that come with that, including fellowship, friendship, support, and then also a lot of times very tangible things like food and clothing. And even I've seen buddy and mentoring programs and adoptive family programs. So make sure folks, you offer that and ask people about their connections and help them. They'll often get rides too. I know transportation came up. I know it's an issue almost everywhere. Sometimes with the faith communities, people can get rides, definitely get rides to church. That's not too hard, but also maybe for shopping or other kinds of things. So really, really glad you brought that up, Rachel. Thank you. It's great to see all the resources. Okay. I'm going to move us on.
Yeah.
Oh, job placement. I'm going to read this chat. There's going to be a long, we can share the chat too, Sophie, afterwards if you want it, just for your folder, because it does have good resources in it. So we can add that to the folder. Because one of the important resources that we have to coordinate with, and we're going to spend a few minutes really talking specifically about coordinating with landlords and property managers. So those are a resource too, landlords, and we need landlords to find apartments for people, both Rapid and PSH. Some of you may be in site-based, but almost all the PSH is scattered sites. So we need landlords to run those properties and places for people to live in. And of course, for rapid rehousing, we're finding units in the community for people to move in. But we really need them to partner with us and we really need them to do their job. Right. And so landlords are, there is a difference in the relationship and the roles of the landlord versus the case manager. And really, landlords have the important role of putting out the lease expectations and making sure that people are notified if they're not meeting those lease expectations. We need an assertive landlord, right? So that there's consistency, that there's a response if people are in violation of their lease. And that violation may look like non-payment of rent. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's noise or visitors, or maybe they moved someone into their unit who's not on the lease. But we really need landlords to notify people when they are in violation of the lease. And we also need the landlords to work with us as case managers, as housing focused case managers, because we're the ones to help people comply with that lease. So if somebody has fallen behind, maybe they had their car broke down and they fell behind in their rent, can we help them either create a payment plan, or maybe not either, maybe create a payment plan to pay the back rent, but also find some resources that might pay some of that back rent, right? So the role of the case manager is really to help the person try and resolve whatever the lease problem is. So if the person's having too many visitors or too many parties, can we talk about how you can socialize without disturbing your neighbors, right? That would be our role as the case manager. Not our role to say, Suzanne, you broke the lease, because that's the landlord's job. But it is our job to say, we know you got some notices, and hopefully the landlord's copying us. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then we're addressing with the person, how can they resolve this so they don't lose their housing, right? And so we're teaching them. We want to make sure they know what the rules are. So I think the most common thing that people don't realize is you cannot just move someone into your unit, right? I think that's the most common thing is I have a unit, I have a couch, no one's sleeping on it. Why can't I move my friend in or my whatever in? And people don't automatically know that that's a lease regulation, that you have an occupancy agreement about how many people are going to live in the apartment. So we want to make sure people are not breaking the rules by accident, but that they know what the basic lease obligations are. So that's another part of our role, is teaching tenancy skills, and then also helping people learn how to negotiate with a landlord. So for a landlord, turning over a unit costs them money. It is always better for a landlord for them to maintain stable tenancy, because when they turn over a unit, they have to, get it back in shape. It's usually offline for a month or so, and they lose revenue. So, usually landlords really do want to make it work, and we want to help people learn how they can negotiate with that landlord. Just because you're behind on your rent doesn't mean you have to leave, right? Or just because you got a 3-day notice doesn't mean you have to leave. Let's see if we can negotiate something with this landlord so that we can make this work. So that's a really, really important part of our role. We've talked about a lot of these concepts, but they're important to just reinforce, is that it is expected in these housing programs that people follow the lease. What's different, the same lease that any one of us would follow if we were renting an apartment. What's different is to have support from the case manager and other supports in the community. So the expectations of the lease have to apply to everyone. If we don't have a landlord who's enforcing the lease, or we have an unsafe building where the rules are not enforced, or, things, landlords just don't give people notices that they're late or they are underpaid, it's really hard for us to do our job, because our job is to help people resolve those problems, right? So if the person doesn't even know, and I'll give a quick example, and then I'll call you Dr. Terry. of veterans, where in HUD-VASH programs, veterans, oftentimes the landlord will say, oh, let's let it slide. The guy's a vet or gal's a vet. And then it's 6 months of non-payment, and now it's $1,200 or $1,500, and now they're done letting it slide, right? And then it becomes really hard to resolve that problem, right? So we don't want things to be let slide, and then all of a sudden the landlord said, "Well, that's it, I'm done with them," because for somebody, $1,200 might as well be $12 million, right? It's a big debt. So, Dr. Terry, did you want to say something?
Yes, I was going to add, even with teaching our clients not to run, so many times they vacate their properties when they get their first initial, letter stating that you rent is due, and you're going to be faced with eviction. They see the word eviction and immediately think that they're getting evicted, not understanding that there's a process that the landlord or property owner must go through before they get to the eviction process. Is that this is a time to collect funds to be able to pay up the debt. So many times they vacate their properties, not understanding that they abandoned the property, rather than getting an understanding that there are ways to cure, some of those things.
Absolutely. Excellent point, Dr. Terry. Really, really important that people are educated on that so that they don't just cut bait, and get out because they think they're done, but that they have rights and that they're entitled to due process around resolving those problems. And it's really, really important to let people know, because they get scared, they see it, and they think, I'm out of here. Let me just get out of here. And then, as you said, they abandon the unit. So really, really important that we do tenancy education. We are helping people correct their behaviors. So a lot of things can cause people to misbehave in housing. Boredom can cause misbehavior. Substance use can cause misbehavior. Mental health can cause misbehavior. Lots of things. Your kids, they just are kids. That can be a problem in housing because they're making too much noise. But what we really are working on is not, you need substance use treatment, because whenever you drink, you make a lot of noise and you knock on people's doors. You can't knock on people's doors late at night and disturb the peace. Whatever's causing you to knock on doors, we do want to know that and understand that, but the behavior needs to stop. And I think taking a behavioral approach with people, making sure they're clear, it's the behavior that's the problem. Now let's talk about how we're going to solve that behavior. How are we going to stop that behavior? That's a different conversation. And maybe it does mean some change in someone's substance use habits, or maybe it does mean some change in person maybe taking medication to sleep at night because they're yelling a lot at night, and that's disturbing the other neighbors, and maybe they'll take some sleep meds, but they aren't going to take antipsychotic meds, right? We're trying to help people get the behaviors down so that they are following the lease, just like any other renter in housing, right? And if I'm not paying my rent, or I'm not following the lease, I'm making too much noise, my landlord's going to say to me, you got to stop this, or you got to pay the rent. And I don't have a case manager, unfortunately, to help me figure out what to do. But that can really open up the conversation. Sometimes it is a window when people are getting in trouble with their housing. They may be willing to start seeking treatment for some of their issues. And that sometimes it can be the thing that really gets a person going, where they realize, oh, I'm going to lose my housing. I really do need to do something about this drinking. Maybe that's what's going to happen. Or maybe they think, well, I guess I'm just going to switch to beer, because when I drink vodka, I make a mess and I get violent. But if I drink beer, I get mellow. Right. So I'm giving that as an example because I think what we're talking about is we all understand that there's underlying behaviors, underlying conditions and issues for people. We're helping them with the behaviors, but we can address those underlying conditions, but sometimes we can't. Right. But we're there to offer that. We're also there to offer a collaboration with the landlord. And I think some of our early days and our old agency was organizing against slum landlords. But here we are showing a picture of us loving landlords, because we need that collaboration, shaking their hands. And it's important, in order to work together, that we understand each other's roles. So the landlord should not be saying to you, oh, whose face can I see? I'll say Rachel. I see Rachel's face. Rachel, Andrea hasn't paid her rent and you're the caseworker. Can you go tell her she's in violation? She's late on her rent. Well, Rachel, as a case manager, can say, oh, you know what? It would be so much really effective if you let Andrea know that she's late on her rent and gave that to her in writing. And then I will definitely follow up to see if we can put a plan in place to resolve that problem. But it's really important that those roles are clear. And I think a lot of times when a landlord sees that there's a case manager involved, they are like, oh, well, we'll just get the case manager to get them to follow the lease. Well, no, we don't want that to happen, right? Because that separation of roles is important. If people are ever going to move on or have life after case management, they should have, we're trying to create a normal, quote unquote, not an alternate reality, where a landlord enforces the lease and your support worker, your therapist, your counselor is not your landlord, right? We also want to make sure that we're hearing what the landlord is observing. And maybe also sometimes if people are in a building where there might be security or there might be maintenance, people have a lot of valuable information about what's going on with folks. So we're, as workers, checking in with the landlord on a monthly basis at least, to see how is it going for Rachel, just checking in. We want to hear what their observations are, but we also want to know and have clear procedures around what we share. So even if we have a release of information, I cannot share protected health information about Rachel. If the landlord says Rachel's late on her rent again, what's wrong with her anyway? What's her diagnosis, right? I can't tell the landlord, even if Rachel's given me a release of information, because the landlord doesn't need to know that, right? It's a need to know basis, right? In addition to its protected health information. But if the landlord says, what's wrong with Rachel? Well, we want to hear what they're worried about. What are you concerned about? We want to explain why we can't share information. They can't really share diagnostic information. That's just the law. It's not me, kind of thing. But what are you concerned about? And what are you worried about? So we want the landlord to share that information. And remember that public behavior is public behavior. It's not confidential. So if somebody does something in the lobby or out in front of a building in the street, that's public. There's no release is needed to discuss that kind of behavior, or if someone's running around knocking on doors at night, it's not really protected information. We really do want people to issue notices in writing, paper, not just a verbal, you made too much noise last night. And we also want to be copied on those notices if possible. Now, we know you're dealing with a lot of different landlords, a range of some mom and pop landlords, to maybe a larger property management company. So, the mom and pops, they often don't have all the systems in place, like the standard letters and things like that. So there is a resource. This is a property manager's manual, and it has sample letters in it that people can use to issue violations and can be a resource for those landlords. And to the extent that we can, if we can be a resource to landlords, that is great, right? Because then they see our value is helping the person, the tenant, be a good tenant, but also maybe we know about resources for home repairs that might be paid for through a community action agency or weatherization funds. I know everything's changing in our federal landscape about resources that are available, but we also want to share resources and help the landlord do their job. Okay. Speed talk. Okay. We're gonna have about 5 minutes of a breakout, just to talk a little bit about what is happening with people and your property managers, what kind of lease violations you're experiencing, and how is it going with your landlord. So, we'll just take a few minutes because
There it is.
welcome back, everybody. Sorry, I know for some of you that was a short breakout. For some of you, you were done talking with each other after 2 minutes, but it did seem like most people had some good conversations. I'm just going to give a minute if anybody wants to shout out anything or share anything. I think my concern is that people are not putting you in the role of the landlord, and hopefully that's not happening too much. But does anybody have anything they want to say about this? No.
Well, one of the things you said, not playing the role of the landlord.
Yeah.
Earlier you stated that when there's a violation, not to emphasize the violation, just tell the client basically something as if, don't worry about the violation itself, but to educate them on I guess, the rest of the components of the lease. Um, but I think
Mm,
as part
yeah,
of
no, I
my
don't,
work,
if that came out, no, they need to know the violations. They absolutely should know if they've
okay,
broken the lease. Sorry if
right.
I misspoke. So thanks for pointing that out. People should definitely know the violation. They should know what the behavior is that's the problem,
Mhm.
and they should know what they need to do to solve it with the landlord. So
Right.
yeah, we're not keeping that from them, and we really want the landlord to be very assertive and clear, and in fact, give people a notice in writing,
Mhm.
for the most part, which I think is one of the barriers we see is that landlords don't necessarily give things in writing. We recommend that landlords give rent receipts so people get a receipt for giving their money
Mhm.
so that more things are on paper for people and it's a
That's
little
right.
more formal.
That's right. And the other thing is one of the things with working with landlords and leases, there's so many times we don't, if you don't know the landlord tenant code, there's always ways out of a lease. Most of the time, legally out of a lease. You know, if a person becomes unemployed or they desire to move downstate, or if there's, someone died. There's, I mean, just there's so many scenarios that a person that needs to get out of a lease can get out of a lease. But so many of them just don't know that. And they don't also know that even if the landlord is not making the repairs that they need to make, that they need to put their monies in an escrow account. And so many times they don't know what an escrow account is. And only certain banks and financial institutions hold escrow accounts. So we have to be
Yep,
educated in that as well to make sure that they understand that you can sue your landlord for an illegal oust. You can sue your landlord if they don't make repairs essential to your living. So there's different things that our clients can do, but we have to educate them on the right way to do it.
absolutely. And actually, I'm going to use you, Terry, Dr. Terry, because I'm going to skip this slide and come back to it. But we really want to make sure people know their obligations as a tenant. And this slide gives the basics. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever read your lease. Sometimes we do a poll and ask how many people have read their lease, and there's always a few, but it's a lot of legalese. And so, how do we educate people in a way that makes it understandable for them? So you can use this slide because it's these are the main things you got to do to follow a lease: is don't bother your neighbors, pay your rent, don't create a health and safety hazard, don't move anybody in who's not on a lease, don't engage in criminal activity, and keep your utilities on. Those are the basic things, right? Report, and of course you do need to report any repairs right away, because if you have a leak and you're leaking on your neighbor, that could cause you a problem. So we want to make sure people know their obligations, but we also, as Terry said, want people to know their rights, right? Their basic rights of tenancy, the right to privacy, right to self and maintained housing. You mentioned using escrow. That's something people is very complex in a lot of places, and people need, you can't just withhold your rent, right? It's a formal process. So we want to make sure people don't just say, oh, I'm not paying my rent because they haven't fixed the leak in my bathroom, because that's not the process, right? You have to do a formal process around that. And then we also, as was mentioned earlier, want people to know that they have a right to due process, right? That you can't be evicted. Usually a 3-day notice means you have to have a cure. It varies in every state, but we want to make sure people know those things. And then we have some resources for you. To do this tenancy education. So tenant laws are different in every state, and then sometimes even in a city within a state. There's some Delaware resources. Your legal aid is great. DeClassy, which is how I know them, they have some resources. That Delaware courts have some resources on landlord tenant. And then this is a workbook from the University of Nebraska. It's a free link, and it becomes an individual's workbook as a renter. It gives lots of tips, and it's a thing they can use as they move along in their journey as a renter. So those again are hyperlinked. So hopefully, when we checked the links yesterday, you should be able to access those resources and use them. And just a quick poll. Again, remember polls are anonymous, so um, don't be shy. Is just on tenancy education. Are you offering tenancy classes or tenancy education in your program? Yes, no, planning to, or other. You guys are quick on this poll. This is a quick poll. Not a lot to read. Okay, we're gonna zip it in. We'll give it about 10 more seconds because our time is flying by. All right, as soon as we get, yeah, we got 75%. I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Okay, about a quarter, just under a quarter of you are currently, about a half of you are not. About 20% are thinking about, and then a couple of you said other. I don't know if there's anything on the chat
No,
that you
I
put in
looked,
there.
no.
Okay, great. Thank you. Definitely something to think about. You don't need to do it yourself. You can invite in legal aid. You can get the rent-wise workbook. Maybe somebody on your team, maybe somebody in your community is knowledgeable about this. So you don't have to do it yourself, but it's really good for people to get some resources. And it's one of the first eviction prevention strategies that there is. So I'm going backwards in the slides. If you're going, oh, she was ahead. I am doing that on purpose. Because one of the most important things we can do is to teach tenancy skills to prevent eviction, right? That's really one of the most important things is people know the rules and they know their rights. Other things we can do is rep payee or automated rent payments. For a lot of people, there's too much temptation. They don't have a lot of money and they get their money and, there's competing forces. So if we get their major bills paid by automatic rent payments, that can help. We want to, of course, help people get as much income and resources as they can. If people have zero income, I know they can live in PSH, but they're not going to live well in PSH and they're going to be in trouble. They're going to get in trouble because if you have no money, you need money. We live in America. So we want to make sure people are getting food stamps, they're getting any cash assistance they're entitled to, any free resources so that they can stretch their budget. And even if people do have income, we want to connect them so that they have more resources in their lives. You don't have to only use the food pantry when you run out of food. That's not the rule, right? So we want to make sure people have access to resources. We need people to be honest with us in their budgets about how they recreate. So if we do a budget and the person has, only their bills and their rent and car payment and utilities and, groceries and gas, and there's no recreation, most people spend money on something, right? So we want to know what other things are recreating, what that recreation would be. Sometimes it's the lotto. I see people, I'm not a gambler, so I always feel like that's throwing money away, but I see people $20 at the lotto every Friday, right? That adds up on your budget. So we want to make sure that we have that information so we can help people plan around that. We also want to think about carpets, drapes, headphones, purifiers, fans, things to address things that might be bothering other people in the building, even if it's a smoking is allowed, for example. If your smoke bothers your neighbor, then it's not allowed, right? So that's an example. We talked about the connection to the faith community. That is definitely eviction prevention strategies. We've talked about alternative strategies for substance use. So the person, gets wild and starts knocking on doors whenever they drink hard liquor, but when they drink wine, they go to sleep and they're calm. Well, maybe that's going to stop the problem behavior. In permanent housing, people can add people to the lease. So instead of you trying to sneak somebody in and every time you come over, there's a quick shuffle to move all the evidence of the other person around, making sure people know that they could add someone to the lease. Now they may have to pay more rent. That is going to change the income in the household depending on the subsidy. But for most people, they don't want to live alone. And I guess this is another learning from our practice as social workers. We meet a lot of people who are single when they're homeless because homelessness is a state of disconnection. And it's a state where people are very likely to lose their friends, their family from what happened they had before they were homeless. And people want connections. So we want to think about that and give people an opportunity to talk about who they want to live with. And if they really don't want to live alone, it's not going to work, right? They're going to bail out and they're either going to move someone in or they're going to move back to the homeless camp or the shelter or whatever they're going to do. So making sure people know that and then giving people an opportunity to do something meaningful so they're not in trouble all day long. And then as was mentioned, I think by or referenced really in some of the breakout was that if someone is really not making it and we can't help them figure out how to follow that lease, is to voluntarily agree to leave the apartment without a formal eviction on their record. Because for a lot of our folks, having one more eviction on their record is going to mean they're never going to get a place, right? And for a landlord, that may be a great option too, because they're going to save the court costs if the person voluntarily leaves. But then we do need to work with that person about what's the plan so this doesn't happen again. I did see your hand up, Terry. I just want to acknowledge that, Dr. Terry. Did you have something you want to say?
And I was gonna say, also to be mindful of the pets.
Pets, yes,
So
the
many
pets.
times people want to claim them as support pets and things of that nature, support animal, emotional support animals, and they are really just pets. And sometimes you have those dogs that bark too much. The smell of the animals, you know, the constant, even the animal feces that are left and not picked up, and you know, the terrorizing of the children in the in the building or the neighborhood, those things as well.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the pets, because I think pets is something we need to add that more in here, because pets are, we heard last time people move in pets. They didn't have a pet when they're homeless, then they move in, then they have a pet. And, a lot of buildings are no pets, or they want a pet deposit. And if you're going to get a reasonable accommodation, there's a process that you need to follow. So making sure that's a really important point about people knowing they can be evicted for their pet's behavior too, right? So it's no different from your if your visitors are creating a disturbance in the building, you can get a violation for your visitors' behavior as well.
So
So
Carolyn said, one of the ways we can help people is to have all prevention programs be able to assist people before they have a formal eviction on their record, which is very true. And many of the programs that provide important resources do require that you have either a utilities cutoff or an eviction thing. But it's a nice segue. We are going to talk about how we can prevent people before they get a formal eviction.
okay, and yeah, that's a very good segue. Thank you. And I think that's also um something about how you build out your prevention and design in your system prevention programs. And I know that's an agenda item in Delaware, and people want and consistently say they want more prevention resources for people um as well. So I know that's a gap in the system. So in our speed talking, we have 10 minutes left, and Andrea's going to talk about this tool, a harm reduction plan to prevent eviction.
So we're using this to prevent eviction. As you see on the left side of it, there is a lease violation. So the landlord smells marijuana coming from the apartment. It's bothering the neighbors. So this is a nuisance behavior, right? And you'll see this is set up a little differently because there's a third column all the way on the right, which is non-negotiable. Some things in the lease are non-negotiable, not how you meet the expectations, but non-negotiable. And it also is from the tenant's perspective. So what this does is open up options about how they could meet the expectation. So one is a simple stop smoking pot. And the other thing is then we're going to talk to people about what would the benefits of that be. So it would solve the problem with the landlord, it would save money, it would expand the possibilities for employment. So we got something to work with there. And then what are the factors against? I don't want to quit and I have PTSD symptoms and this is the only thing that helps. So as we go to non-negotiable, the landlord has to address the nuisance behavior, but the tenant also must get relief from these symptoms. So we're guided in the new things. So I'm not going to go through everything, but it could be a substitute. It could be finding another way to consume marijuana. Okay, you might address that, would address the landlord's concern. That would allow for use for PTSD. That might resolve the nuisance. But what are the downsides? For prescription medication, this client was worried about becoming addicted. And for the other thing, it's more expensive to consume marijuana in another way. So that, we are working through this problem. We're introducing new options, but that it may take a while. And as Dr. Terry said, sometimes it takes a while to connect people with a resource. Sometimes it comes a while to develop a strategy that they can address the eviction. But we're reinforcing what the problems are, what the landlord's going to do, and what are their options. So on the next page, where there is a There's an exercise that we're not going to get to today, but we do have a suggestion for you. So there's a link to a blank harm reduction plan. So try it out. Try it out in your team meeting, get people's input, and see if this might be helpful as a way to introduce the concepts of these are the options to change the behavior. And as we all know, harm reduction changes consequences through changing behavior. And this is what this harm reduction plan is about.
So the link is on this slide here, 24, to the blank plan, and the blank has this like completely empty, and I think it does have a sample in it.
Mm-hmm.
And people may not come up with the solution or figure out what they're going to do.
Mhm.
Like, do we know what this person is going to do? We don't know. Maybe none of these things is going to really work for them, or maybe number 3, finding a substitute, is going to work.
Yep.
Maybe it's gummies. That's going to work for them, but it may or may not resolve the problem. But we're giving people a new model of thinking about a problem and thinking about different ways to solve it, different options, and then also evaluating those options, right? And sort of, instead of maybe having a knee-jerk reaction, oh, the landlord, I'm out of here, I'm moving somewhere else, right? Like could be that could be, the landlord's giving me notices because they smell my pot. Well, I'm out of here. I'll find another place to live. Right? That might be a person's first thought. So we're trying to create some new problem solving skills and new opportunity for people to think about having more options. And the word options has come up a lot, and choices, right? So the more choices and options people have, the better they feel in their lives.
Yep.
So as Andrea said, you can take this home and do this right after the session and try and fill out a harm reduction plan with one of your tenants.
Or you can
But
do it in your team meeting, right?
yes.
The other thing that's really important is really celebrating housing success. When people are able to change behavior, when people are able to follow the lease, we want to really connect that to their long-term goals. We want to really support that. People need to know they're going in the right direction. And oftentimes we often center on problems, but we want to do that. And we want to focus on those housing goals from day one and continually connect them. The other thing that we want to do is concretize that celebrating housing success. And we'll give you an example. This was for a single site building, actually. And one of the things we asked the property manager to do is write people a letter when they've been able to follow the lease for 3 months. And people really were honored by these letters. They liked the letters, they framed them, they put them on their walls. It showed some success, it built people's confidence. It also made it possible to connect it. When people have a tenancy history, they have more options for housing. They may want a bigger place, they may want to live with their family, and we could connect to those things. And it really supported people and those sorts of certificates. I also want to say we often recommend that you give certificates when people have done a housing training or a training course, and people really like that. And it shows that it reinforces the knowledge that they have, but it also shows them that they've been able to do that. We want to teach tenancy skills every chance we get. We want to, reinforce lease requirements. We want to get away from that impulsivity that you guys have brought up. We want to help people increase and manage their money. We want to have clear expectations of participants, and part of that comes from the landlord making the demand, because that'll set them up for the future. Nobody has a case manager come to their house and says you have to pay your rent, right? Not outside of supportive housing, and hopefully not in supportive housing, but the landlord may make that demand, and we want to train people how to problem solve around these issues so that they're supported in the future. We also want to, explain to people through the tenancy education and through the incidents that come up, what can be negotiated, what can be appealed. How you pay your rent is negotiable. Paying rent is not negotiable. So introducing ideas of, payment plans, those sorts of things. And we want to mentor people and skill building, which means we do a lot of the work with the landlords with people, not around people, so that we teach them that and we talk about what are the skills that were used and how they could put those skills into practice. We want to believe in people before they can believe in themselves. And we need to really believe and shine it through our eyes that we believe people can maintain housing. And you know what? People often need that lift, that when somebody else believes in them, it's easier to believe in yourself. And we want to do that ourselves. Okay.
And that should be in quotes because that's what I heard from a man who is now a case manager who was a chronically homeless person and talked about his journey. And what really mattered for him was he was so down on himself. It really mattered that staff believed he could do it. And that really was a game changer for him. So we'll make sure we get the quotes in there, but that's not our language. That's somebody else's who's doing
Yep.
great.
So as we're wrapping this up, Housing First is a successful evidence-based solution to homelessness, but it's not housing only, and it's not anything goes. There's a structure to it, and a lot of what we talked about today is the structure, both of case management, but also property management and leasing, and how we can use that structure to help people be successful tenants. Housing is the shoes that people wear. It helps them move forward in their lives. It certainly helps them connect to those long-term goals, and that we addressing complex issues that people experience requires a stable base and stable resources, and that people have to have confidence and a feeling of competence in order to try things. We're asking people to take a leap of faith, but the leap of faith is within themselves. And so we're helping people, really look at confidence, competence, and importance, which are motivational strategies. As somebody mentioned, motivational interviewing has been incredibly helpful. Absolutely, these are right out of motivational interviewing. So with your help and the right supports, people can succeed. We want to build that motivation and that confidence and those problem-solving skills. We want to use harm reduction, risk reduction strategies. We want to focus on the behavior that might be interfering with them establishing that base in the community and using that as a jump off point. We want to connect people with supports and resources, and we want to help people get what they want, which are those goals that they can really feel. And that'll provide the motivation for them to move forward. And that we are asking people to do hard things. Paying rent is a hard thing if you've never paid rent before, but if there's a reason to do that, people are more willing to consider it and consider strategies in order to do that. So that's really what this is about. So we're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna say many thanks, good luck. We are right at 12. I just want to show people the resources at the end. And these are financially friendly pet resources. These are from My Pet is My Home, and these can be
This is just a
really
searchable database to find cheap resources in your community, and you can search by zip code. My Dog is My Home is written a framework with the Alliance on supporting people with their pets who are homeless. So those are a couple of documents that are out there. These are great resources. They're policies for shelters and housing projects, pets policy, owner acknowledgement, pet supplies needs assessment, and a lease addendum. So if you are the landlord, or some of these resources may or may not be useful for you. And then this is also a resource for domestic violence shelters. We know you have DV shelters, and there's grants available to help people make modifications. So the other resources you saw last time is Housing First and additional references and research. So we are hopeful those are
Thank
useful
you.
to you. So thank you.
So we want to wave goodbye and thank you. It's been a real pleasure working with you all.